I'm 92 years old, and I've been sitting with something for 6 years now that I need to say out loud before I leave this earth. Something I've never told my children, never told my grandchildren, never whispered to a single soul at my church. Because for most of my life, I was too proud to admit it, and pride. Let me tell you something about pride. Pride will let you die alone with a secret rotting inside you, and I am too old and too close to the end to let that happen. So I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, even the parts that make me look like the villain. Because in this story, I was the villain. Not partly, not sometimes. I was the villain for most of my marriage, and the man I did it to never once called me that. Never raised his voice, never pointed his finger, never told a single person what I put him through. His name was Robert, and he loved me for 58 years. 58 years. And for at least 35 of them, I made that man feel like he was invisible. We got married in 1959. I was 33 years old. Robert was 36. We weren't children. We were grown people who had already seen some of life. I'd buried a mother. Robert had come back from Korea with something in his eyes he never quite talked about. We weren't starry-eyed. We were two people who saw something steady in each other and decided to build. And we did build. 6 children. A house in Memphis, a small upholstery business. Robert ran out of a shop 2 blocks from our home. We went to church every Sunday, sat in the same pew for 40 years, had the same neighbors, the same routines. From the outside, anybody looking at us would have said, now that's a solid family. That's a real marriage. But what nobody saw was what happened inside that house when the doors were closed. I need to tell you something about myself that most women of my generation never admitted. I was angry, not the kind of angry that screams and breaks dishes. I'm talking about the slow, cold kind. The kind that lives in silence, in the set of a jaw, in the way you answer a question with one word. When you have 50, you're choosing not to say. I was angry from almost the very beginning, and I never once told Robert why. Because in 1959, women didn't do that. You didn't sit your husband down and say, I need more from you. You didn't say, I feel alone. You didn't say, I am carrying everything in this house, and I need you to see me. You just carried it. You carried it, and you smiled at church, and you fed your children, and you kept that house spotless, and you told yourself that suffering quietly was the same thing as being strong. I told myself that for decades. The truth about what made me angry is something I have to be honest about. Robert wasn't a cruel man. He wasn't a cheat. He wasn't a drunk. He wasn't a man who raised his hand. He was just absent, in the way that men of that era were absent. He worked 6 days a week to keep us fed. He came home tired. He sat in his chair. He read his paper. He fell asleep before the children were even in bed some nights. He forgot things. He missed things. There was a night, our daughter Cecilia's school recital. She had been practicing that piano piece for 3 months. 3 months of that same song echoing through our house, and Robert didn't come. He got caught up at the shop. He called and said he was sorry, and he meant it. But I watched Cecilia's eyes scan that audience looking for her daddy, and I watched her face when she didn't find him. And something in me closed that night. Brick number 1. That's how it started. Not with a fight, not with a confrontation, with a brick. And I kept laying them. Every missed dinner, every time I asked him to talk to me and he turned the television up instead, every birthday he half remembered, every time I was sick and had to take care of myself because he didn't quite know how to sit with someone in their pain, every time I needed him to see me and he just didn't, I laid a brick. I never said a word. I just built that wall higher and higher and higher until one day Robert reached for my hand at the kitchen table, and I moved mine away to pick up my coffee cup, and the look on his face was something I have spent 6 years trying to forget. He looked like a man who had just been told something he had always feared was true, and I pretended I hadn't seen it. Here is what I did with my hurt, and Lord forgive me for this, because it took me until I was nearly 90 years old to understand what I was really doing. I weaponized my warmth. I gave it and took it away like it was something to be earned. When Robert pleased me, when he remembered something, when he showed up right, I was warm and I was soft and I was the woman he married. And when he disappointed me, I turned cold. Not mean, not loud. Cold. And the terrible thing, the thing that kept me up for years after he died, was that I was so skilled at it that Robert could never quite name what was happening. He just knew that some days his wife was present and some days she was 1,000 miles away in the same room, and he spent the better part of our marriage trying to figure out what he had done and how to fix it. Trying and failing and trying again. That man never stopped trying, and I mistook his persistence for proof that what I was doing wasn't that bad. If it were really that bad, I told myself he'd say something, he'd leave, he'd give up. But Robert didn't do any of those things, so I kept going. There came a season in our marriage. Our children were teenagers. Money was tight, the business had a bad couple of years, and Robert started staying at the shop later and later. I told myself he was choosing work over me, and maybe he was. But I also know now, sitting here at 92, that a man can only knock on a closed door so many times before he finds somewhere else to put his energy. I think Robert stopped trying to reach me emotionally, somewhere around 1978, and started pouring everything into that shop instead. And I resented him for it. I resented him for the very thing I had driven him to. I want you to sit with that for a moment because it took me 40 years to sit with it myself. I pushed that man away so thoroughly, so systematically, so quietly, that when he finally stopped pushing back, I blamed him for the distance. Now I need to tell you the part I have never told anyone. Not my oldest daughter who thinks her mother was a saint. Not my pastor who presided over Robert's funeral and told all 200 people in that church what a beautiful love story we had. Not one living soul. Robert tried to talk to me about our marriage one time, just one time in 58 years. It was 1987. We were 61 and 58 years old.